You know, if there's one question I get asked more than any other, more even than when you're in the middle seat of a plane, which armrest is yours? That question would have to be, Mark, are you a considered and intentional photographer? Or do you just spray and pray and hope that some of your images turn out okay? Well, today we're going to try and answer that question. Now, contrary to popular opinion and completely counter to the evidence provided in my final work, I do like to think that I approach photography with the level of deliberation deserving of the art. No, don't laugh. While it might not seem it at times, I like to address the scene with a compositional aesthetic, framing my subjects with a sense of order and balance. Spontaneity, well, that's just an excuse for poor impulse control, and I like to think that at my age, I've actually cracked the whole executive function thing, even if my working memory is shot and my cognitive flexibility is as bad as my physical flexibility. But there have been times I've missed that decisive moment while I've been framing my subject, taking meter readings and perfecting my focus. I guess I'm still an old school film photographer at heart, but even when out with a digital camera, I haven't really allowed myself the freedom to embrace the randomness of clicking the shutter and hoping for the best. Well, it's time for a change. Time to relinquish the training wheels of autofocus and go manual. Look, it wasn't a difficult decision. I was in Melbourne and I had with me my Olympus Pen F Digital, an 8-year-old micro four thirds camera with contrast detect only autofocus, and this time I even paired it with a manual lens. Now, before I leave you with the impression that I'm some analog master of manual focus, I was not using some portrait lens with razor thin depth of field. I had this with me, my Laowa 7.5mm C-Dreamer. That's 15mm in old 35mm terms, and despite its fairly wide maximum aperture of f2, it pretty much scoops up everything from the near distance to infinity, swallowing the scene and spitting out results that are sharper than glass. The lens is small, light and discreet, perfect for the street even though it was really designed for drones. Hey, baby steps for this zone focus neophyte gambling over the fresh fields of spontaneous manual focus photography. I shot wide, I shot stop down, and I clutched my Pen F to my belly as I wandered the streets of Melbourne like a roo protecting her joey, and just pointed the camera blindly at whatever seemed to be coming in my general direction. Look, it's hard to make a wide-angle lens, and even harder on micro four thirds, where you're effectively having to halve that focal length again to get an equivalently wide field of view into that small sensor image circle. There are some great super wide options for micro four thirds. Both Olympus and Panasonic have 9mm f1.7 offerings that I don't own, and there are some more compromised zooms, such as a Panasonic 7-14, which gets a bad rap, but I've never tried. There are some more premium options such as the Olympus Pro 8-25 and Panasonic Leica 10-25 that are reputedly good, but I don't have them either. I also haven't tried some of the other third-party manual ultrawides either. I know. You're wondering why you're even bothering tuning in now, but I guess it's because you're interested in the one that I do have, the Laowa 7.5 F2 C-Dreamer. And there is one simple reason why I have this, and it really comes down to its size. What you're getting is a minuscule lens, a jewel that gobbles up light like a glutton, but manages to spit out an impressive rectilinear image at the end. That rectilinearity, and try saying that after a few ciders, is actually quite an achievement on a lens this small and this wide. You'd normally expect it to distort like the convex side of a spoon, and while you certainly get that gulf between foreground and background you'd expect from an ultra-wide, with this one you get straight lines with it, so the effect isn't too much like a 90s hip-hop video. Who let the dogs out? So this isn't a dog of a lens, even if this is a shaggy dog of a narrative. And size-wise, this is more poodle than pincher. So even if it's not perfect, it'll hang out in the corner of your coat pocket until called upon to do its dioramic duty. Shooting wide is not easy though, and while you'd think 7.5 is an ideal focal length to capture the Melbourne street scene in all its breadth and beauty, like any dodgy primary school project, this urban diorama can be cluttered and compromised by the randomness of the real world. So there were more than a few times where I had to crop in to provide a point of focus. And of course, since I wasn't actually looking at what I was shooting most of the time, the horizons were rarely straight and my lampposts were not perpendicular. Other than a few occasions though, I did try to keep things pretty much as they were. I was familiar enough with this optic to know that the only way I was going to get a clear subject was to get in close. Though how close is close? This thing can focus up to 12 centimeters, which will give you a pretty good view of your subject's nasal hairs. But even when trying to capture some of the environment, you'll be surprised how close you need to get. That said, while you do get a shallow depth of field at the minimum focus, and the lens does give you a commensurately long focus throw at the near end, by the time you get to a more comfortable 1.5 meters, you're already shuffling towards the distance, and by this stage, at f5.6, pretty much anything from right in front of you to almost infinity is in focus. That's one of the compelling features of this lens. Like my GoPro, you just don't need to focus. In this case, I just set the focus to the middle distance, and just about everything other than the far horizon and your own fingers are acceptably sharp. Now, you've probably already formed some opinion on this lens already, so let me know what you think in the comments below. And while you're at it, why not click that like and subscribe for more content like this? I won't try to convince you that these photos came out like this straight out of camera. I've obviously dipped them in the toffee apple coating of my personal Kodachrome preset to try and elevate them just a little bit. So you're not seeing this lens in its most neutral rendering, but I think it's already clear that this manages to stay sharp enough where it counts, though this might not win any awards for sharpness at the corners or delicate rendering of the out of focus areas. It's a functional ultra-wide that you can just lock the focus off at 1.5 meters, set it to f5.6, up the shutter speed to a 400th of a second, and just hope that the auto ISO doesn't ditch you in the gravel of high noise. At these settings, it's like shooting fish in a barrel, but without the barrel distortion, and our aquarium is the photogenic streets of Melbourne. We've wandered around the native napping site of Flinders Street Station now to see how it manages the expansive fields of Fed Square and the painted back streets of Melbourne's laneways. The end is nigh, and I'm riding high on this review of the Laowa 7.5mm C-Dreamer. This isn't a comprehensive look at all of the use cases of this lens, and I'll probably do a deeper dive at some point, but suffice it to say, this small block of metal and glass is the cipher to a specific kind of street photography, that in-your-face brutal rendering that only an ultrawide can provide. It'll also capture those angles in architecture and cavernous church ceilings, and even embrace those expansive landscapes, as long as you have something in the foreground to mitigate the vastness of that 110-degree field of view. I've taken this with me all over the world. While ultrawides are not considered everyday lenses, this one belies the notion because its small size means that you can have it with you and just use it whenever you want to add a bit of drama to any scene. But for now, let's just revel in its role as a compact street sweeper for your urban photography exploits. This is not a perfect lens by any means, and I do feel that its primary purpose as a drone lens means you lose some of the character for the sake of that sharpness. The lens coating aggressively neutralizes flare, but it does produce a subtle halation in the highlights that becomes amplified when you try to post-process. It does produce some reasonable sun stars though once you stop it down to f16 or f22, so that's one more useful feature to this exotic optic. Picking 6 from the plethora of distorted street shots, and it was difficult because there were so many. Finding the perfect balance of character and composition though, and the job becomes a bit easier. I mentioned how you have to get close to create an impactful image, and in some of the also-rans, well, they suffered from being just too deep in the frame. I mean, is that Jason Momoa? Not close enough to say for sure, but I'm erring on the side of caution since he's not wielding a Pacific Warrior shark-toothed dagger or a Leica.
Leica for life.
I do like this one of what has to be a Uniqlo clothing model, though I do think this lady definitely outstyles him with a 50s housewife look. Actually, this photo probably reveals the best and worst of this lens. Nicely sharp where it needs to be, but the out of focus areas are, well, just not as funky as the in focus foreground. This one represents another issue with the lens. We belong to the land of the squishy people, so watch the edge of the frame with this lens. This is a bit better, but it still didn't quite make the cut. I kept this one in though. The scene is already off kilter, so I'll forgive the elongated head at the edge of the frame. I love this one though. It really didn't need to be taken with an ultra-wide. The flat on framing adds a formality and minimalism to the image that really does let you focus on the beautiful golden tones and simple subject matter of the woman and her children. In the end, it's the people that make a place, and I've whittled down these 3 shots to 1. The kid can't really take the credit or the blame for the haircut, and perhaps despite the tail flip flare to the pink jacket, the hangdog look on the guy doesn't invite you in. Certainly not with the effortless cool of this cyclist. For the last 2, well, I'm always attracted to the incongruous, and I do like this one, which captures some ephemeral imagined moment, though I think looking back at the video it was really just a split second in a fairly mundane scene. For the final image, I struggled selecting between this, which I like mainly because of the intriguingly antithetical statements of choosing life and it being the end, but ultimately I decided that that's just way too clever for me and settled on the more reductive scene, with the car boot being a definitive, albeit a bit obvious coda to both the alleyway and this series of images. And that's it for the Laowa 7.5mm C-Dreamer f2 for Micro Four Thirds. It's all metal build quality, small size, and it's almost foolproof independence from the complexity of proper focus and exposure means it's a no-brainer on the street. Literally, you can just turn off that cognitive machinery and let your camera follow the vague direction of your eyes. So easy it makes you wonder how they did it back in the day of manual film cameras, managing the limitations of 36 frames with a camera that does nothing to help you through the hurdles of shutter speed, aperture, framing, and focus. I mean, yes, of course, I can shoot blind with an ultrawide on a digital do-everything device, but what about something a bit slower, a bit more considered than digital, something like my Leica M2 with its 28mm lens? Can I recreate the magic with a single black and white roll? Well, let that be a topic for our next video. Later.